Dogs, comfort dogs, rescue dogs, therapy dogs. We've got them all today. Laurie's going to bring us a story about what dogs can do to heal people. But first of all, this doesn't heal anybody. A blue wave has crashed over Virginia, buoyed by big money from out-of-state billionaires determined to upend the balance of power in the Commonwealth. Well, what payback will these radical liberals exact? And what could this mean for President Trump in 2020? Charlene Aaron has the story on this historic upset.
A major victory for Democrats in Virginia after Tuesday's elections, giving them control of both the governor's office and the legislature for the first time in more than 25 years. Former Vice President Joe Biden tweeting about the wins tonight. By voting in Democratic majorities in both chambers of the General Assembly, Virginians sent a clear, powerful message that will resonate across the nation and shake the walls of the White House. While Democrats claim it's bad news for President Trump, CBN News chief political analyst David Brody points out he lost Virginia in 2016, but still won the presidency.
Hillary Clinton won Virginia in 2016, and how did it work out for her? Donald Trump is not on the ballot. So as much as Democrats can make a big deal, when he's on the ticket, it means it's a big difference.
Suburban voters turned out in high numbers, particularly in the D.C. area. Polling showed that gun control was a major issue after a shooter killed 12 people in Virginia Beach in May.
We ran on a very definite message, and that was we believe in conservative values.
Democrat special interest groups poured money into the state in the final days. 1 week before Election Day, more than $82 million had been spent making this the most expensive election in Virginia history. After the election, House Majority Leader Todd Gilbert, who won his race, issued this warning. Make no mistake, radical liberals from out of our Commonwealth will soon demand a return on tens of millions they invested to elect a far-left Democratic majority. Their agenda includes stricter gun laws, raising the minimum wage, and more liberal abortion laws. It also includes ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment, making Virginia the final state needed for possible passage of the gender equality measure. While Gilbert promises the GOP will fight the agenda, the Democrats have the upper hand for the first time in decades.
The voters like the progress that we as Democrats have made over the past few years, and they want us to continue that progress over the next few years and beyond then.
Meanwhile, in Kentucky, Democratic challenger Andy Beshear declared victory in the governor's race over Republican incumbent Matt Bevin. The GOP governor, trailing by just over 5,000 votes, is not conceding the race. President Trump campaigned for Bevin a day before the election, in a state that he won big in 2016. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
And now shocking news of massacre of 9 Americans living in Mexico. 3 mothers and 6 children gunned down, some of them trapped and torched in blazing cars. Well, what monsters did this? Ephraim Graham has the grisly details.
Pat, a suspect is in custody today as Mexican authorities investigate the bloody attack. 9 family members, including 6 children, died when the gunmen opened fire on their SUVs as they drove in the country. They were traveling as a caravan when authorities say they were attacked by a drug cartel who may have mistaken their vehicles for a rival gang. 3 mothers and 6 children, including infant twins, died in the hail of gunfire. The attackers then set some of the cars on fire. Now stories of heroism are emerging from the survivors, including the 13-year-old boy who hid 6 of his siblings in the bushes and then walked 14 miles for help.
He basically saw that cartel shooting. There are like 60 people shooting at them from all over the mountains around. And the little kid decided to get the kids away from where they were shooting and go into the bushes. That was courageous.
And the 7-month-old girl found alive on the floorboard of the car, put there by her mother in her final moments. The family is part of a religious settlement living in northern Mexico. President Donald Trump tweeted it's time to go to war on Mexico's drug cartels and offered to help. Mexico's president declined that offer. House impeachment investigators have set their sights on Mick Mulvaney. They want the acting White House chief of staff to testify this Friday. They believe Mulvaney may have been, quote, directly involved in an alleged effort by President Trump and others to withhold security assistance to Ukraine in exchange for an investigation into Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter's business activities. Pat?
Well, I want to tell you, as I've said before, there isn't the intestinal fortitude among the House Democrats to really open an honest impeachment. They aren't voting impeachment. These are merely some inquiries from House Judiciary and Intelligence Committees. And the majority leader of the Senate has said, we clearly have the votes. We will not pass impeachment. And as I said yesterday, from what we've seen in past instances, the Senate, by a simple majority, can vote not to receive that a bill of impeachment from the House. So it's an exercise in futility, and sooner or later the American people want to say, are you kidding? I mean, how much time do you want to waste with something you know can't go anywhere? So that's what I believe. Listen, there's a group called the Southern Poverty Law Center. It has been the target of some very serious allegations of misuse of funds, etc. And Ephraim has a story of what they have done against a Christian ministry. Ephraim.
Pat, as you said, Christian ministries are being labeled haters, lumped in with Nazis and white supremacists, simply for their biblical beliefs. As Paul Strand now reports, one ministry is fighting back in court.
Folks acknowledge the Southern Poverty Law Center did good work for years by targeting haters and racists like the KKK and neo-Nazis. But then they took a lurch to the left and began to put conservatives and Christians on their hate map.
It's happened to dozens of groups, including Florida's D. James Kennedy Ministries, because it stands for traditional marriage and against radical parts of the LGBTQ agenda.
They put us right next to the neo-Nazis, right next to the skinheads, right next to the Ku Klux Klan.
So the organization sued the SPLC.
We have objected that their characterization of us as a hate group is defamatory.
And even dangerous. In the ministry's video, Prophets of Hate, it shows a would-be mass killer launched a terrorist attack on the Conservative Family Research Council because it was on SPLC's hate map.
When he was interrogated by the FBI, they asked him, how did you pick your target?
Southern Poverty Law lists anti-gay groups. I found them online.
What he objected to was our stand on traditional marriage.
And that should worry churches and groups all across America taking that stand because it could land them all on the hate map.
The hate label is a game that the left plays to try to do three things: to marginalize you, to demonize you, and then to criminalize you.
And another issue is how legislators and law enforcement consider the SPLC as an authority.
A committee of the United States Congress held hearings in which they said any group that's on the SPL's hate map ought to have their tax-exempt status stripped from them.
So what Wright's pointing out here is much more is on the line than just conservative and Christian groups being called haters.
If you say I'm a hater because of what I believe, then you're playing a very dangerous game. When government and the law can punish people for what they think, that is on the cusp of totalitarianism.
And Wright insists it fits into SPLC's stated goal of destroying conservative groups like his.
They are nothing more than a collection of reputational terrorists.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
It's a legal battle we must continue to follow. Pat?
You know, there was a time that sodomy was considered a sin. It was considered a crime. People who practiced it were outside the pale of the law. And it's been reversed now so that those groups are protected. They are put in a very high position. And anybody who feels that marriage should be between a man and a woman, traditional marriage according to the Bible, according to the teachings of both the Jewish and the Christian faith, if anybody holds to that view with any organization, they are now stigmatized and are the subject of the attack by groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center. But it won't stand, but nevertheless, the Bible says a curse causeless will not stand. And this is a curse they're trying to put on honest people. But sooner or later, the Bible will prevail. And marriage is still between a man and a woman. I don't care how many of these 1%ers or 2%ers claim something different. Marriage is still a man and a woman, period. Ephraim?
Pat, winter is officially on its way after the warmest October on record. The year's first snowstorm is headed for the Northeast starting Thursday and going into Friday, bringing as much as 12 inches of snow to some areas. That will be followed by below freezing temperatures up and down the East Coast. Some areas could dip well into the 20s. Well, it is one of the least known stories of the 20th century, how President Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II worked together to bring down communism and to end the Cold War. It's now coming to the big screen in a new documentary called The Divine Plan. In the spring of 1981, assassins shot both President Reagan and Pope John Paul II, just 6 weeks apart. Both men nearly died.
Both of them lost half their blood. One 60% estimate, one 60%, one 50%, and some of the facts come from the New York Times.
They both said to one another, this Protestant president and obviously Catholic Pope, they said to one another that they believed that God had spared their lives because they should have bled to death. They both should have died.
While the Pope and President had admired one another from afar, the assassination attempts drew them together. When meeting for the first time at the Vatican the following year, they confided in each other their belief God had spared their lives for a reason. That reason? To defeat communism. In private, Reagan put a name on it, the Divine Plan, or the DP.
And DP was a code word he always used with his own cabinet, Casey and other. When they say DP, it was a code word because they felt like certain things were always occurring in some kind of higher design. So when he confessed to John Paul II that he felt like, not that he didn't have a faith, but that his faith mission was galvanized by that assassination, John Paul II agreed with him, and they were united from that point forward.
On the surface, the two men appeared to have little in common.
John Paul II, because he only knew of Reagan through Western media, actually was suspect about him being a bit of a warmonger, because if you listen to Western media at the time, so he wanted to meet, on top of this, he wanted to meet Reagan face to face to see if he was a man of peace. But after that meeting, he told his peers that Reagan was a man of peace, we could partner with him.
Robert Orlando, who wrote and directed The Divine Plan, says they quickly discovered strong agreement on the bedrock principles of faith, freedom, and human dignity.
They also both suffered a lot in their lives. By the time he was 21, he describes himself as very much alone, and all the people he had loved had died already.
Although they visited in person only 5 times, President Reagan and Pope John Paul began a rich correspondence, and through it, developed an extraordinary bond. From the Polish solidarity movement in the Pope's homeland to the fall of the Berlin Wall, The Divine Plan shows how the President and the Pope persevered together in prayer and diplomacy until Soviet communism ultimately unraveled. And The Divine Plan is in theaters for a one-night Fathom event tonight. For more information on where you can see it, go to cbnnews.com. Pat?
You know, I miss Ronald Reagan. He was an absolute wonderful man. He was very clear in his point of view. He grew up in bedrock faith, and he said, I've got one view of foreign policy. We win, they lose. That was it. But what a great man he was, and we miss somebody like that. And we see some of these political leaders, they're some of them good, some of them bad, but Reagan towers above them all, of the current leaders, what I've seen. When
his famous line to Mr. Gorbachev, tear down
that wall.
That wall, right.
You know, the State Department tried to take that line out. He wrote that line, and they said, oh, you can't do that. That's too inflammatory. He put it in anyhow. I'm going to put it in. And, you know, I saw what he did with Maggie Thatcher when she attended the White House, and he made some remarks at, I think, her birthday or his birthday or whatever, and they were so funny. And I called the guy that was writing some speeches and stuff for me. I said, can you get that speechwriter? It's fantastic. And they said the president wrote it all himself. Wow. Yeah, he scratched it out on our, you know.
And that's the line we remember all these years later.
Line, and of course, the one in that debate, you know, he was debating Walter Mondale, and, you know, they were claiming he was too old. And, you know, he scratched down before he got into the debate. He said, I want you to know, Mr. Vice President, that I will not use your age and inexperience for political purposes. It won the debate. I mean, he was so good. Oh, may we have more like him.